This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Buck Melton. Buck, you've been with us a lot on many different occasions. We've talked about, I guess, things of import relating to our American system of government, particularly the Constitution. And right now, there's a substantial amount of tension because of the president's recent executive order. And Congress apparently is quite upset about this. They're attempting to bring this before the courts. We've had some discussions about this before, but why don't we kind of run through what the points of contention are in these circumstances?
Sure. I think what we've got to begin with here is we've got something with short-term political fallout and then longer-term constitutional issues involved as well. And of course, the people who are concerned about the short-term fallout are muddying the waters a bit by mentioning the long-term constitutional problems. So they're all jumbled up together. But the basic question here is, what is an executive order? How far can it go? Why has this particular executive order caused such controversy? And an executive order is something that is not written into the text of the Constitution. That's the first interesting point about it. It's one of these extra constitutional powers that presidents have exercised since George Washington, as a matter of fact. And since it's not written down, there is a question of, is it legitimate? And if it's legitimate, how far can it go? And what can the president do with it? And what can the president not do? And obviously, since we're living in highly partisan times right now, the Republicans are very concerned that the president has overstepped his authority on this occasion.
And there's not a real bright line on the subject, is there? And presidents have done all kinds of things over the decades in the past using this particular tool for leverage for their policy. What would a reasonable person say that a president should do with these executive orders? I mean, obviously the president has to enforce policies. It has to sort of clean up, I guess, the rough edges of congressional laws. Any comments about that?
Yes, well, executive orders are generally orders to the executive branch. And of course, the executive branch is the biggest branch in government. There are millions of civilian employees, not counting the Department of Defense. And the way I like to put it is that an executive order tells the president's employees to do something or not to do something or how to go about doing something. And so that gives the president a lot of leeway. Some of the very famous executive orders would be George Washington's Neutrality Proclamation in 1793. Were we going to get involved in the wars of the French Revolution? And if so, were we going to be on the side of France or the side of England? And George Washington, as the chief foreign policy spokesman, essentially said, we're going to be neutral. We're going to observe neutrality. Another infamous executive order was the Japanese relocation order in 1942, when President Roosevelt ordered all United States citizens of Japanese ancestry inland to concentration camps in places like Wyoming, so they could not be involved as saboteurs if they had any leanings towards Japan. So you see many very famous executive orders. Affirmative action began as executive orders under the Kennedy and Johnson administrations.
And I think Harry Truman integrated the armed forces, did he not? I mean, that was
1948.
That was an executive order.
Yes.
So there's a long history of presidents using this particular power. Have the courts ever found there's been an executive overreach in using executive orders?
The courts have been reluctant to do that. There are a couple of important cases on this point, but generally speaking, the executive branch's role under the Constitution is not to make law, but to execute it, but to carry out the law. And the president takes an oath of office swearing that he will faithfully execute the laws under the Constitution. But in practice, the courts have been very, very reluctant to tell the president how to go about doing that. Prosecutorial discretion is something that people are somewhat familiar with. If we have a crime spree in Macon and there are 15 axe murders and 20 cases of jaywalking, and the DA does not have the manpower to prosecute everything, he's going to exercise some discretion, and presumably he'd go after the axe murderers instead of the jaywalkers if he couldn't go after everyone. So the courts have generally taken that role with the executive. The courts are not going to tell the executive how to go about enforcing the law. So generally speaking, the courts have not gotten involved in that. The most important case is the Youngstown case, which is also a Harry Truman case, which I think we've talked about some in the past. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yes.
Yes. During the Korean War, Harry Truman actually seized several steel mills that they were having some labor disputes with, and the workers were preparing to strike. They were going to strike. This meant lower steel output during wartime, and Truman said, we just can't do this. We've got to keep steel production up. So he seized the steel mills, and he was taken to court by the steel mills. And the court told him he could not do that, that was overreaching when it came to an executive order. And out of that, we get Justice Robert Jackson's threefold analysis that when the president can point to either some sort of authorization by Congress or else some sort of clear constitutional authority, such as being commander-in-chief, then his power to issue an executive order is at its broadest. If Congress has somehow said, no, you can't do that, then the president's powers to issue executive orders are at their weakest, because it seems like he's trying to supersede legislation with executive action. And then there's what Jackson termed the zone of twilight. What if there is no clear statement either way? Then the court's going to have to look at that one very carefully.
Well, that sounds, that's a rather germane conflict, is it not? I mean, if in fact we have a divided government, we have the Congress is attempting to pass laws, and to pass a law, they can be vetoed. So to actually have a law passed requires 2/3 vote to override the president's veto.
Correct.
And if the president can just propagate any kind of decisions he wishes, then we really slide a little bit, do we not, towards some kind of, I guess, kingship. Or
Yes.
we have sort of a king in a way. If the courts don't limit this routinely, and if it takes a long time for the courts to limit executive overreach, I mean, it's a rather troublesome thing, isn't it? Is it going to take a long time to get a legal opinion about this?
I would imagine at least a couple of years. If there was some national crisis. Now, for instance, if Obama were actually interning Japanese American citizens again, that would get to the court very, very quickly for obvious reasons. But these things turn slowly. And unfortunately, the courts have fallen into the same problem that both Congress and the voters have, that it's slicing off thin slices of salami, or the thin end of the wedge, that you don't realize where you're going over an arc of 50 or 60 or 70 years. But ever since World War II, the presidents have gained altogether too much power, and it's becoming a very dangerous thing.
Well, you could say, I mean, the thing that disturbs me somewhat about this is, all right, we have liberal, conservative divide in the country, and if the conservatives were in power, we had the circumstances reverse. The precedent would be, precedent would be quite well established that the conservative president could do anything he wished to liberal causes without any recourse. And it's also disturbing to me that apparently it takes such a long time to get a decision on this. I chuckled a little bit about it, but that's a long time. And if the president is doing all kinds of things and likely to do so, it seems to be in a period of divided government over the next 2 years, shouldn't some kind of working arrangement be put together by the courts? I mean, how does one do this? Otherwise, lots of issues.
Yes, well, the courts themselves are divided. If you look at some of the biggest issues decided in the last 30 years, 5-4, 6-3, things just hang in the balance, and that's why And that's why judicial nominations have become so contentious since the Bork years, 1986. And you can use bork as a verb, to bork someone, to
Yes.
put them under such intense scrutiny
Yes,
they can't
yes.
possibly get confirmed.
So if we're going to have a situation, let's just suppose this, there's going to be a Republican Congress and a Democratic president. They're going to be at loggerheads with one another. Congress will not have a 2/3 vote to override vetoes. Thus, they'll be somewhat powerless. And the president could just propagate anything he wishes, pretty much. It sounds that way. I mean, what could he not do?
Yes.
I mean, he could, I don't know, if he wanted to, I don't know, intern people, or he said, well, I've decided this television show is against the national interest. I'm going to just close you down. It's you have to, or maybe fairness.
Yes.
Maybe there's a fairness doctrine he could propagate. He could
Yes.
say, I've looked at all the different news shows, and I've decided fairness means that their opinions are too extreme that are being expressed. Or he could say, well, I don't like all of the church sermons that are out there. These church sermons are violating fairness, and I'm going to just impose some kind of I'll have the federal government monitor this. I mean, you could go through any number of possibilities.
Yes.
And the Congress presumably would be quite powerless to stop this. And if the courts are fangless, they're going to take a couple of years to figure out what's up. Couldn't irreparable harm be done? And what do we do about that?
Yes. Well, I think based on the current state of jurisprudence, some of the hypotheticals you've given, or at least I hope they are a little bit beyond the pale. And the
Well, I
reasoning-
attempted to do that.
Yes.
I tried to make them
Yes.
beyond the pale.
Although, if you keep slicing that salami, at some point you might get there. I think that's your point.
Yes.
That we still have the idea of preferred freedoms when you're dealing with matters of civil liberties, such as equal rights, the Equal Protection Clause, any First Amendment rights, petition, press, speech, free exercise, Fourth Amendment rights, anything like that. The courts have, in the last 70 or 80 years, given what they call strict scrutiny to any laws that tend to play with these rights.
Or executive orders?
I would imagine they would apply strict scrutiny in executive orders as
What
well.
exactly does that mean? I mean,
Yes.
in other words, if the court system is so laborious and slow, and we haven't gotten into the issue of standing on the subject, but I mean, the courts are very loath to get involved in executive overreach, if you could say it that way. And if once they do get involved, it takes several years to come to some kind of decision. That seems somewhat inadequate.
Well, it could. Now, once again, let's take some of your worst case scenarios. If President Obama issued an executive order right now, I don't know, Ferguson is a big flashpoint right now. Racial tensions are high. So if Obama ordered the Army to either arrest all whites in Ferguson and remove them to prevent racial violence, or he ordered the arrest of all blacks in Ferguson
Yes.
and export. That is violating a fundamental right, a fundamental preferred freedom, and the courts would hear that on an expedited basis. That would go up very quickly.
What about the declaration of martial law? I mean, presumably, now I'm not sure on these issues, but can the president declare martial law in an isolated place, or is that the province of the governor to do that?
This is actually a very interesting issue. Martial law would be the suspension of habeas corpus, which means that no government official, no general, no FBI officer would be required to show a court why he's holding someone in prison or in jail.
Yes.
It's a question as to who declares that. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended under certain very narrow cases by the federal government. It can be suspended in case of invasion or in case of insurrection. But it uses the passive voice. It doesn't say who does the suspending.
Yes.
It's listed in the legislative article, which indicates that Congress would have to pass a law to suspend it. In actual practice, President Lincoln established the precedent that the president suspends habeas corpus, which he in fact did in several places during the Civil War. And on purely executive authority,
Yes.
You had the military arresting people and holding them without trial.
Well, I'm finding our conversation somewhat unsatisfactory in that I keep pushing that the courts are going to intervene and straighten the situation out, and it seems like they're somewhat sluggish about that. So the other option that the Congress is going to make use of is to restrict funding, and
Yes.
we've been through that recently in regards, I guess, the government shutdown issue, which took place some months ago.
Yes, yes.
So if the Congress did not like, I guess, these executive orders, and this is in the offing, they're going to try and do something. I mean, could Congress just micromanage the executive by saying we've decided we're going to turn off your air conditioner? I mean, we pay for your air conditioning in the White House, and you've displeased us.
Yes.
So we're going to micromanage what's up there. No more air conditioning, or we notice you're spending too much on your coffee bill is too. We want to get some cheaper coffee for you.
Yes.
We want you to take public transportation. We're going to close down with the presidential jets. I mean, can Congress do something like that? I mean, and I certainly hope they don't take those steps. Such an inflammatory action. But are your comments on that?
Well, from here we are moving from constitutional more into the political. And this is where Obama really has, in the words of John Boehner, waved the red flag. I don't know if you read my recent commentary in the Telegraph saying that this was a great occasion for Obama really to build an important legacy by, in his last 2 years, restoring the principle of compromise to Washington. And the principle of compromise is all but dead and buried. And he could really have reached out to Republicans.
Yes.
Instead, what he did was to act as if he had won a huge reaffirmation of his presidency and his policies in November, and instead of being trounced, which he clearly was. So Obama has, in political terms, dared Congress to take him on. So I'm afraid what we could get now is Congress, the new Congress, not in the next 6 weeks, but beginning in January, the new Congress could start passing budgets saying, all right, here you go, but this budget is going to completely gut ICE. It's going to gut any ability to issue any further green cards, for instance. And then we get a game of budget chicken. Obama will veto it, and then Congress will pass it again without the things that Obama wants, and he vetoes it again. So we're back to gridlock. And while we are there, the only thing Congress can do is shut it down. And if Congress doesn't want to go that far, and as long as Obama keeps vetoing, then his executive order stands.
One of the great virtues of our government is the checks and balances system there. But have we had situations in the past, looking back on the long reach of American history, where the executive and any of the branches have been in such their relationships in such disrepair that effective government just could not take place, and as it caused a national crisis? I'm scratching my head to try and recollect that.
There are several cases. None of them are exactly parallel to this. I think it was Mark Twain who said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme."
Yes.
That there are several phases in American history when one of the three branches tends to dominate. And there are some cases in history when the branches are at each other's throats. The best example that pops out is Reconstruction, when Lincoln, who had pretty much run the table during the Civil War, was assassinated, left Andrew Johnson in the White House, and Johnson just lacked Lincoln's political skills. The electorate, as well as Congress, were in an ugly mood, and they proceeded to override every veto that Johnson issued for years and ended up impeaching him.
Yes.
So, yes, you can certainly see that, although in that case, Congress had the whip hand rather than the executive branch.
Now, it's not talked about. I mean, and I don't think it's a practical possibility. But the idea of impeachment, I certainly don't imagine it'll come anywhere near that. But what happens in circumstances where there's you're at loggerheads? The Constitution requires high crimes and misdemeanors. I mean, you're sort of an expert on the subject.
Whatever those are, yes.
Well, yeah. So I mean, merely disagreeing, that's not enough to even go into that arena, is it?
Yes, the weight of authority is against impeachment lying for mere political differences of opinion. Now, that is not set in stone someplace. When you saw the politics of the 1790s and the
Yes.
very early 1800s being particularly vitriolic, the Jeffersonian Party was carried out several impeachments of federal judges who were Federalists, whom they
Yes.
didn't like, largely because they were
right,
Federalists.
right.
That didn't fly, and after that, we kind of calmed down on the subject. There has to be some sort of serious wrongdoing going on in the executive branch for them to consider that, or on the judicial branch.
Yes, yes. Well, it's a really, it's a complicated state of affairs. As I understand it, the Congress has not done certain things. It's been impossible to do something. So just to ask the question, could the president just say, well, you have not been able to pass a law. I'm going to issue executive orders, some of which you may like and some of which you may not like, and I'll just stop dealing with you. And so
That's what he just did.
But I mean, I don't know
Precisely.
if he necessarily tightens down on the border. I mean, it's my understanding about that. In other words, as I understand this, I think there's been a big, I guess, desire to really stop illegal immigration coming across our southern border. And to do that, the president has said, maybe, well, let's go ahead and do something. However, you have to fund it. So I'm not going to really do anything unless you put the money on the table. So ergo, nothing is going to happen pretty much because of the way these things work.
Yes.
In fact, there's no increase in enforcement.
Yes, and that is the problem here. Dealing with the green card issue, the amnesty that's just been issued. How do you block a non-action? Because Obama's essentially said, "I'm not going to enforce deportation."
Yes.
So how do you block somebody not doing something? How do you force a president to faithfully execute the law? This does seem to be moving in the impeachment direction in constitutional terms, but impeachment would be a godsend to the Democrats.
Of course it would.
Yes, exactly.
No one wants that. I mean, there's no.
Oh, the
question.
Democrats would eat it. They'd love it.
Nobody, no American wants to go through that.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
no. It's any right, how can I phrase that? It would be very, very unnecessary event. Well, just looking at the situation, however, I mean, I've heard it said before among lawyers that if the law is on your side, argue the law. If the facts are on your side, argue the facts. Mm-hmm. And here, I've pushed to see if there's any kind of legal guidance on the subject. It seems pretty confused.
Yes.
The facts are another matter, and it's hard to say what happens if you legalize 5 million people here. It's sort of a critical mass in a way. If there's so many people here, I think in Georgia right now, my understanding is there are about 400,000 if you want to say it this one, undocumented immigrants. That's a huge number, 400,000 people.
Yes.
And there are obviously many nice, very meritorious people.
And I would say,
this number, I mean, they're very superior, wonderful people. Many of them are, and their circumstances are often distressed.
Yes.
But that's as far as encouraging immigration, there seems to be what a tremendous, why would you not come here? I mean, what possible reason would there be not to illegally come to the U.S.? And if you were a legal immigrant, why would you go through all the difficulty of legally being here?
Yes,
it's
exactly.
a long, complicated, difficult issue. And how is it going to be possible to ferret out who among all the undocumented immigrants here are legal and not legal? Mm-hmm. It's going to be pretty much impossible. And what about just some of the facts of the circumstances? What about the people that are on the border patrol? I mean, it must be very dispirited. I mean, why would it?
And I know people who worked like crazy to jump through the right hoops and get their green cards legally. They were so excited when they get it. They showed it.
Sure,
they're not green, by the way. They're sort of a tan color.
Well,
yes. So imagine what they're feeling. Yeah, and I think we should preface this. These 400,000 people, I would care to bet you just about anything you want to name that most of these people are extremely hard workers.
Of course.
That they've got the work ethic more than most people who are born here now. That they do the scut work that you and I would really not enjoy doing.
Yes.
So I don't mean to belittle that, I think the thing you miss out on is the socialization, the thing that makes America America. And you and I have discussed this before in several contexts, that the United States is becoming nothing more than an economic zone. But the thing that really does define America is, rightly or wrongly, for good or for ill, that sense of American exceptionalism. The emphasis on literacy, on education, on the work ethic, on the rule of law, on stability, Burkean stability. And the problem with just saying, come on in, is you are at least running the risk of not socializing the new arrivals into that way of thinking. And in that sense, you are changing not just the face of America. I mean, the face of America has changed completely and regularly, but you're changing the essence of America. And
Yes.
that is far more worrying than the mere face of America.
It's very complicated, isn't it, as to what the country is going to be like as we go into the 21st century. It does appear to me that many nations are having very, you could call them failed states. Many of Central America, I mean, I hope I don't say anything bad about our fellow humans on the planet, but many of the countries to the south of us have very substantial political and social and economic problems. It's a very tough situation there. And the attractiveness of crossing the Rio Grande is so powerful that it would appear to me that just millions of people, had they would come here. And I understand, if I can say it this way, that apparently some of the things in President Obama's, I guess, executive order is people are not to have different kinds of benefits of one type or another. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, if somebody comes to the emergency room, no matter what their political story is, they're going to be treated. I mean, there's no one that's turned away ever in any emergency that I know of. Yes. So people are going to get substantial amount of help, if one could phrase it that way. And the system is also quite corruptible. Yes. If you have millions of people here that allegedly are not supposed to get some kind of benefit, their ability to get that benefit is substantial. Yes. And then finally, to make one other comment, there's so much, I guess, dispute over voter identification, that sort of thing. It seems to me this just provokes that kind of tension in the country. You'd like to have it where these tensions did not exist, but that seems to be stirring the pot a little bit. Yes.
So he hasn't done away with the tension by this executive order. He's just changed how the tension is going to manifest or where it manifests. I don't know. I think it's opened up a can of worms, or at least opened up another can of worms. And once again, the thing that I worry about is the socialization aspect.
Yes,
where does that put us 50 years from now?
Well, now, one of the things, too, is my understanding is these people now, formerly what's happened is they haven't been able to secure employment. They just are on it, but now they can legally be employed. I mean, I don't understand all the nuances of the executive order, but maybe that's going to create some kind of economic competition. If someone is, I guess, we discussed how diligent and hardworking many of these people are, and so they're now going to be in more overt competition for different jobs at another level. Yes, and that may cause some kind of tension. Presumably, they could be employed, and could they not get Social Security cards? And I mean,
I would suppose so. And there's also an equal protection issue somewhere. If Obama has said, yes, you can have green cards, but you can't be eligible for this or that or the other service. Once again, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which in many ways has been incorporated against the federal government as well, says that a state cannot deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. It does not say a state cannot deny to any citizen. It says a state cannot deny to any person within its jurisdiction. So
now you've said something that's extremely important here. I think we sort of have to wind this up, but on this point, it could well be that the courts, having been sluggish to do anything about this, that a case will present itself where a person says, look, it's true enough, I'm here, I've been allowed to stay here by the president, I'm not a citizen, however, I want to claim my rights. There's no way you can deny me this. I'm planning on spending the rest of my life here, and I want food stamps. I mean, and there could be an argument on that subject.
Yeah, so you've got a potential bootstrapping issue here. So now that they've made this first step, then does that open the door to other steps?
Well, this is going to be an interesting period of history in front of us, Bucky, and we'll
Yes, it will.
talk some more about it.
Indeed.
So thank you for your
Thank you, sir.
comments. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.